This is CNN Breaking News.
Welcome to our viewers in the United States and all around the world. This is New Day. It's Thursday, October 17th. It's 6 o'clock here in New York, and we do begin with breaking news. Sad breaking news. Congressman Elijah Cummings has died. According to his office, Cummings passed away at 2:45 Eastern Time this morning. The cause of death, complications from long-standing health challenges. Cummings had a heart condition. According to the Washington Post, he recently underwent a medical procedure that was supposed to keep him out of work for 1 week or so. The congressman missed 2 roll call votes last week and never returned to the job.
He was only 68 years old, John. Cummings served as the chairman of the House Oversight and Reform Committee and was playing a key role in President Trump's impeachment inquiry. Cummings was born and raised in Baltimore. That's the community he represented in Congress since 1996. He became committee chair in January after the Democrats won back the House of Representatives in the 2018 elections. He made headlines on New Day in 2015 in the wake of the death of Freddie Gray. Here was his emotional message.
I had my turn. I want them to have their turn. Simple as that.
What can you do for them? What do you do for them?
What I can do is fight for them. And I've got to make sure that people hear them. See, they feel as if nobody hears them. And I think we're beginning to get that. But I'm telling you, Baltimore can happen anywhere. And you've got people looking at us right now saying, oh, that'll never happen in my community. But yes, it will. But you got to have people that listen, and you got to begin to act on it.
I was there with Chris talking to Elijah Cummings that day. He had been on the streets at night, putting his body on the line to save lives. There were demonstrations and protests. He went out overnight to keep people safe. He was beloved in Baltimore and also beloved on both sides of the aisle in Congress. Don't forget Mark Meadows from the Freedom Caucus, one of his best friends there.
I know. I mean, I think that that's part of why he was such an important voice, is that he wasn't afraid to allow his emotions to come to the surface and to show, whether he was crying like we just saw there in a very sad moment, or whether he was expressing his friendship and revealing a deep sort of affection for someone that people didn't know that he had.
I gave him a handkerchief to wipe away the tears after he talked to Chris, and he asked me if he could hang on to it because he was going to need it again that day.
Now I'm going to cry.
He was a great man and a great member of Congress, and as I said, beloved on both sides of the aisle. He was 68 years old. We're going to have a chance to talk more about Elijah Cummings throughout the morning. There is other major news this morning. In just a few hours, one of the key figures at the center of the impeachment inquiry will testify before congressional committees. We're talking about Ambassador Gordon Sondland. He was supposed to appear last week, but he was blocked by the State Department. According to the Washington Post, he's expected to say there was a quid pro quo with Ukraine, but not a corrupt one. We'll try to explain what that means, and there are other new details about what he will say. Also today, assessing the fallout from the tense White House meeting on the U.S. withdrawal from Syria, Democrats say the president had, quote, a meltdown, calling the House Speaker a third-grade politician. Pelosi walked out of the meeting. The White House released this photo of the confrontation, somehow thinking it helped their argument. But it's now being used as the background on Speaker Pelosi's Twitter page. She obviously loves it.
Okay, but we begin this conversation with an extraordinary piece of presidential correspondence. President Trump wrote a letter to Turkey's President Erdogan warning him not to invade Syria. The White House confirms it was written last week on the same day that Turkey did begin its military offensive against the Kurds in northern Syria. So here now, we're going to just listen. Some of our colleagues read this in real time yesterday as they got it, but it's now been 12 hours, and I think that it deserves more analysis. So you and I are going to read this letter in full. Do you want to start?
You go ahead.
All right. Here we go. Dear Mr. President, let's work out a good deal, exclamation point. You don't want to be responsible for slaughtering thousands of people, and I don't want to be responsible for destroying the Turkish economy, and I will. I've already given you a little sample with respect to Pastor Brunson.
The president goes on, I have worked to solve some of your problems. Don't let the world down. You can make a great deal. General Mazloum is willing to negotiate with you, and he's willing to make concessions that they would never have made in the past. I'm confidentially enclosing a copy of this letter to me just received. History will look favorably if you get this done the right and humane way. It will look upon you forever as the devil if good things don't happen. Don't be a tough guy. Don't be a fool, exclamation point. I will call you later. Sincerely, Donald Trump.
So the letter was dated October 9th. That was 3 days after the two leaders had spoken by phone, when it's been reported that President Trump basically gave the green light somehow.
It's been announced by the White House.
Because he cleared the troops out of the area that they would have been in the way of. And so it's hard to know, really, John, what this letter means. If this is just a cover and the president's releasing it to show that he's being a tough guy. But whatever it is, whatever the point is, it didn't work.
I know two things. Number one, people are dying while this letter is being sent. The Kurds are dying. And number two, he handed out this letter at the meeting inside the White House with the House Speaker. We showed you that photo before. So I think it's part and parcel of the same mindset. Let's get more on that. Jim Acosta, Chief White House Correspondent, is here with us this morning. So we have this letter with this language that isn't exactly a PhD level.
Nothing unusual here.
Nothing unusual. And then you also have that White House meeting. Jim, give us the big picture here. What's going on?
Well, I think the president is playing a game of red light, green light. Remember, we all played that as kids. And the president, in his phone call with Erdogan, essentially gave the Turkish leader the green light to go into Turkey. And it looks as though, in a bit of cover, the president fired off this letter to say red light. And the Turkish military did not get the response.
They said no light.
The message.
They said no light. We see nothing.
Yeah, and Erdogan, once he got that green light, decided to do something he's been wanting to do for some time, which is to go after the Kurds in northeastern Syria. I will tell you, talking to people inside the White House over the last couple of weeks, they are very sensitive to this notion that the president gave Erdogan a green light. It is something that is gotten under their skin. And the vice president just a couple of days ago was standing in front of reporters outside the West Wing insisting that the president did not give Erdogan a green light when clearly that's what happened.
It's just hard to understand their reasoning, because if the president didn't give Erdogan a green light, why did Erdogan go in? In other words, if we hadn't pulled back the U.S. troops, that wouldn't have been possible. He hadn't gone in before that.
That's right. And this happens before. You know, this has happened before with this administration. They're trying to pull the wool over your eyes, I think, to some extent here. Remember what the White House said in its initial statement that started all of this.
I can read it. Today, President Donald J. Trump spoke with President Erdogan. Turkey will soon be moving forward with its long-planned operation in northern Syria. Period. Period.
It doesn't say don't be a fool, don't be a tough guy. It says they're beginning their operation, and that, in not just diplo-speak, but in layman's terms, gave a green light to Erdogan.
I don't know.
No question about it.
I mean, the word that I just keep hearing is impotent. And I know, obviously, it has a double meaning, and I'm trying not to think of the other one. What? But impotent, that this is the U.S. president who America can't stop, I guess, Turkey from going in there. If this is the letter, it didn't work.
Right.
Obviously, the atrocities that are being reported on the ground by our correspondents are still happening. The incursion is still happening. Yeah. So the conversation didn't work. The letter didn't work. And when the president signs off with, "I will call you later," what does that tell us?
Yeah.
How is that conversation going to be different than what's on this letter?
And I think the key is the original conversation. And that is why you hear lawmakers up on Capitol Hill saying, we want to see the transcript of this phone call between President Trump and Erdogan. I wouldn't hold your breath on that one. We've been asking for that. And I think it's also the reason why you have to watch these Senate Republicans right now. People like Lindsey Graham, even the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, they are deeply concerned, or they say they're deeply concerned about how the Kurds are being slaughtered at this point. And just listen to what the president was saying yesterday, talking about how they're not angels and how essentially they were mercenaries because we were giving them money and weapons and so on. Our other allies around the world are watching that.
Jim, very quickly, the reporting from inside that meeting. The White House released the photo. There were no pool cameras inside. This was a White House photographer. And for whatever reason, they felt it helped the White House argument to show this picture. Let's put it up on the screen so you can see Nancy Pelosi there standing up in a room full of men taking on the president. What went wrong here? The Democrats are saying the president had a meltdown.
They are. And if you read some of the readouts that came out of that meeting, it does sound as though he did have a bit of a meltdown. He referred to Nancy Pelosi as a third grade politician. He claimed that he was personally responsible for taking out ISIS and that Mattis didn't do it because he wasn't, quote, tough enough. Pelosi was dishing it right back. At one point, she said during this meeting, according to a Democratic aide who released a readout, all roads lead to Putin with you, Mr. President. And I think that is what led to this, clash between these two leaders. And the speaker and the top Democrats in the room got up and left. But it just goes to show you this government right now in Washington is completely dysfunctional. The wheels are off. They've spun down the street. You're not getting this car back on the road. And it just, I think, underlined the fact that there should be no hope for Democrats and Republicans really working together on anything. As they were leaving the room, the president said, "We'll see you at the polls." I think that speaks volumes.
All right, we will analyze this photo more because you also have to look at the body language of everyone else around them and how uncomfortable they're in their heads bowed they look.
Who thought this was a good idea?
That's what I'm saying. He thought releasing this letter and releasing this photo helped his argument there. What does that say about his view of the world? We'll talk about that.
And I'll just say very quickly, it's all about his base.
Right.
End of story. That's it.
Okay, Jim, thank you very much for being here with us. We have more breaking news. It's a very busy morning. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announcing just moments ago, he says there's a new deal for Britain to exit the European Union. CNN's Melissa Bell is live in Brussels with all of the breaking details for us. What do we know about the deal?
Alison, this 11th hour breakthrough, and no one had really expected it first thing this morning because Boris Johnson seemed so penned in by his own Brexiteers in his party, the concerns of the Northern Irish Party. No one imagined that any kind of compromise could be found between his administration and the European Union as they all scrambled to find some kind of deal before the 31st of October. Because bear in mind, Alison, that without it, the United Kingdom crashes out of the EU without a deal, and that was considered catastrophic from all sides. In the end, a last-minute breakthrough has been confirmed by both the European Commission here in Brussels and Boris Johnson, who's just left Downing Street to come here to Brussels, a deal. The negotiators have struck a deal that would allow for a deal to be found. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen because later today, the 27 leaders of the European Union are going to come here down this red carpet. It's going to be put to them. The expectation is they will approve it. But it then needs to head to Westminster for a special sitting on Saturday where British MPs will have to give their agreement to it. Still questions, even at this late hour, about whether the Northern Irish parties will give it their backing once it's put to a vote. But clearly a massive breakthrough here that has led immediately to a rise in the pound and hope that some sort of deal will now be found. John and Alison.
A major step, but not the final step. Melissa Bell, please keep us posted on the developments there. As we said, we have news all over the place this morning, including brand new details about what one of the officials at the center of the impeachment inquiry is expected to tell lawmakers in just a few hours. That's next.
In just a few hours, the U.S. ambassador to the EU will testify before impeachment investigators. Gordon Sondland was allegedly key to the administration's efforts to pressure the Ukrainian government to investigate President Trump's political rivals. Suzanne Malveaux is joining us now with a preview. What do we expect, Suzanne?
Good morning, Allison. Really a sad day on Capitol Hill as we have lost Congressman Elijah Cummings. My condolences to him, but his oversight committee will continue their work today. We are expecting U.S. Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, to testify this morning. Now, Sondland, he's a hotel tycoon, just like President Trump. He donated $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee back in 2017. Well, he is now a key voice in this inquiry. And the big question, of course, is whether or not he is going to show up today after getting blocked last week.
He didn't say that at all.
Despite President Trump's constant swipes.
The whistleblower's report was totally wrong.
And the White House stonewalling Democrats' impeachment inquiry. More and more Trump administration officials and career diplomats are showing up, helping shape a better understanding of the president's Ukraine scandal.
The president's phone call to President Zelensky was really the tip of the iceberg.
This morning, Gordon Sondland is scheduled to testify, joining a growing list, including Kurt Volker, Marie Yovanovitch, Fiona Hill, George Kent, and Michael McKinley. The Republican donor turned United States ambassador to the European Union, a key piece to House Democrats' probe. A source telling CNN Sondland's planning to tell Congress he didn't understand President Trump wanted the Ukrainians to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden until after the release of the transcript of the July 25th phone call. Sondland was the person texting a week before that call with fellow U.S. diplomat Bill Taylor. Those messages released by House Democrats, writing, "I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear. No quid pro quos of any kind," adding, "I suggest we stop the back and forth by text." Fiona Hill, Trump's former top Russia advisor, telling lawmakers Monday she viewed Sondland as a security risk. A source familiar with the testimony tells CNN. She reportedly testified Sondland often used his personal cell phone to conduct official diplomatic business and worried his lack of experience could be exploited by foreign governments.
Every single witness, every single one that has come forward has added to the richness and the texture of our understanding of this sordid affair.
After abruptly resigning from his position less than a week ago, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's former top aide, Michael McKinley, telling lawmakers the reason why he quit. Sources with knowledge of his testimony saying he blamed the details of the transcript from the July 25th phone call and Pompeo's lack of support for U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch.
None of the testimony seems to contradict in any way by anybody what we have learned in the whistleblower's complaint and the transcript that came out of the White House.
Now, Republicans continue to say that the Democrats are hiding their impeachment inquiry investigation behind closed doors, mainly going after Intelligence Chair Adam Schiff. But Schiff firing back now, saying that he's following the rules and the proceedings, quote, in a deliberate manner. John?
All right, Suzanne, thank you very much. Then there's this White House meeting, this closed-door meeting on Syria that left House Speaker Nancy Pelosi questioning the mental health of the president. So what happened behind closed doors? We have some of the new details next.
The impeachment inquiry. Stay updated, stay informed with up-to-the-minute breaking news and analysis. There's only one place for it all. CNN.com/impeachment. In stores everywhere.
All right, the breaking news this morning is this. Congressman Elijah Cummings from Baltimore has died at 68. He'd been in Congress since 1996, and he was the chair of the House Oversight Committee. Of course, that committee involved even today with the impeachment inquiry. There's personal, though, and then there's politics, and sometimes the two are separate. I want to bring in Jim Acosta, CNN Chief White House Correspondent, and Dana Bash, CNN Chief Political Correspondent. Elijah Cummings, Dana, the son of sharecroppers, in Congress since 1996 with friends. Real friends on both sides of the aisle.
Of course. Look, this is, there's so many emotions. There's the personal, but then there's the political. There is the reality of where we are right now. He was the chairman of the Oversight Committee, which by definition is in charge of looking after the executive branch. It is, when you look at the balance of power and separation of powers, this committee was put in place to do just that. So he had been a critical player when it comes to these impeachment proceedings. Adam Schiff might have been the face of it in the last month because of the issue of Ukraine. He has been leading the charge, but Elijah Cummings certainly was right there with him. And he is somebody who clashed with the president and brought out, one of the examples of not the best in the president when Elijah Cummings went toe-to-toe with Mr. Trump, said he was, lashed out at him over an issue, and the president went back at him and started attacking his city of Baltimore. That is, in recent memory, one of the many things that we remember him being in the headlines for. But it's also, again, very personal. I mean, he's a sitting member of Congress, only 68 years old, is right there with his colleagues, had been every single day. And this is going to hit Democrats and Republicans hard.
Yeah, and he did all of his work with such emotion and such much heartfelt feelings and speeches. He often wore his emotions on his sleeve. He cried in public. His voice would crack. So obviously we'll have much more on Congressman Cummings throughout our program. But let's turn to something that was so important to him since he was pivotal in the impeachment, and it continues apace. Every day, Jim, obviously, big, huge breaking news today is Gordon Sondland. He's the U.S. ambassador to the EU. Just to remind people of why he's so pivotal, there was this text message that got a lot of people's attention. It raised a lot of eyebrows, and this was the text message between Sondland and Kurt Volker, who's the special envoy, on Bill Taylor. Sorry, I think.
Yeah, Bill Taylor.
Okay, Bill Taylor. So this was on September 1st. It says, are we now saying that security assistance, meaning military aid to Ukraine, and the White House meeting are conditioned on investigations, meaning of President Trump's political rivals? That's when Gordon Sondland says, call me. And so, of course, the question is from investigators, what did you say in that phone call? What happened then next in that phone call? And what did you know about those investigations?
Yeah, I think that call me in the other text was an indication that there might be a problem and that they needed to have a conversation over the phone instead of via text, something that could be kept in records for later days to come. The other thing that Gordon Sondland is going to be asked about is Fiona Hill's testimony. I mean, she gave some 10 hours of just explosive testimony earlier this week, and some of that involved Ambassador Sondland. At one point, she talked about how John Bolton, the former national security advisor, described Rudy Giuliani as a hand grenade that's going to blow everybody up. But she also testified that Bolton described this arrangement, what was going on between Gordon Sondland and Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, as being a, quote, drug deal. So obviously, these are questions that are going to be asked of the ambassador. And it's going to be how much did he know at the time and whether or not there was this quid pro quo. And there has been reporting that, he has said, well, there was a quid pro quo, but it wasn't an illegal one. Well, how does he make that distinction? And I'm sure lawmakers are going to have lots of questions about that as well.
Dana?
And he spoke to the president in the middle of all of this, that when he was trying to figure out how to navigate this question of whether or not the administration really was holding up aid, which he thought was and still thinks, as the sitting ambassador, is so important for Ukraine, whether or not that was happening because of run-of-the-mill corruption or whether it was really because the president of the United States wanted the Ukrainians to investigate his political opponent, Joe Biden. During that period, our reporting is that the ambassador picked up the phone and called the president of the United States. Right. What was that conversation like? What did the president tell him? And also, beyond that, what conversations did he have with Rudy Giuliani? And how did that play into what the administration, the people on the front line dealing with Ukraine, felt that they had to ask for and deal with?
Look, this is CNN's reporting on what Sondland will testify to today. Let me read it. Quote, if you wanted to get this meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky, then you could either abandon that or you could work through Rudy, the person said, again, describing what Sondland may say on Thursday. They came to understand that what Rudy wanted was a public statement by Zelensky to look at Burisma and the server in 2016. And Jim, big picture here, the White House didn't want Sondland to testify. They tried to block him from testifying last week, but he's part of this parade of government officials who's going anyway.
That's right.
And telling this story of what appears to be an alternate foreign policy run by Rudy Giuliani, not necessarily for the benefit of America, but for the benefit of the president.
Right. And remember, Rudy Giuliani is a private citizen. He is the president's outside lawyer. He is not a government official, and he's certainly not a part of the U.S. Foreign policy apparatus of the government. I think you've hit the nail on the head, John, and I think that is why Congress is taking a very close eye at all of this. This was a shadow or rogue operation that was being conducted by members of the administration. Some were up to speed on everything that was going on, and some were not. And it seems Rudy Giuliani and the president, all of the lines connect back to them in terms of what was known and when it was known. In terms, of the big picture here, John, I don't think we've seen anything like this since the days of Iran-Contra during the Reagan administration, when you saw a shadow foreign policy operation being conducted by the administration. I think there are parallels between this moment and that one. And I think that is why, when you listen to some of the sources that we're talking to up on Capitol Hill, I talked to one earlier this week who was very familiar with what was going on inside this room when Fiona Hill was talking. to lawmakers. This individual said that this is a pivotal, quote, pivotal week in their inquiry, in their investigation. When you talk to people who are looking into all this, they feel as though they are amassing information and evidence, presumably to bring articles of impeachment against the president. And I think Gordon Sondland is a key part of this today.
Yes, he definitely has answers. Whether or not he will share them with investigators, we'll find out later.
That is a big question.
Later.
How much will he
share?
Why does he want to go today and not last week?
Yeah, okay.
Well, last week the administration told him he couldn't. It's fascinating that he's saying, I'm going anyway, whether it's a subpoena or not.
Okay, well, we shall see.
The call is looking less perfect by the day. We could just put it.
Dana, Joe, thank you very much, Jim, I should say. CNN Larry has learned that the investigation into Rudy Giuliani includes a counterintelligence probe. So what does that mean? How does that change the case? How much legal jeopardy is Giuliani facing? We break all that down next.
This is CNN, the most trusted name in news.
CNN has learned that investigators have been looking into Rudy Giuliani's business dealings in Ukraine for months, digging into everything from possible financial entanglements with alleged corrupt Ukrainian figures to counterintelligence concerns. Let's discuss with Elie Honig. He's the former federal prosecutor and CNN legal analyst. Okay. The pieces are starting to come together maybe for investigators. Here's our CNN reporting. The counterintelligence probe hinges in part on whether a foreign influence operation was trying to take advantage of Giuliani's business ties in Ukraine and with wealthy foreigners to make inroads with the White House, according to one person briefed on the matter. If this were the case, things would start to make sense for investigators, Elie. You tell me if I'm wrong, because they follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money. Exactly right. There's a reason. That's sort of an axiom. A counterintelligence investigation is separate from a criminal investigation. They can both carry on the same time in separate tracks. I think everyone's sort of familiar with the point of a criminal investigation. The main point of a counterintel investigation is basically to ask, who is this guy working for, really? And with Rudy Giuliani, that is a very open and important question. I mean, we already know that he's receiving reportedly $500,000 from these two guys who were indicted the other day by the Southern District of New York. What's that all about? Whose interests is he really representing there? At the same time, he's representing powerful Turkish interests that come into play. Reza Zarrab. I mean, so whose bidding is he really doing? That's the question of the CIA.
Maybe he's doing his pocketbooks bidding.
Well, that's certainly his interest, right? And that's the problem. If you're compromised or if you're willing to take money from anybody, then you could be doing bidding of whoever can pay you.
Right, and that's not a defense. That in some ways is incriminating. Who's paying him and why is a key question, not just for the counterintelligence investigation, but also the criminal investigation here, Elie. How much trouble might he be in? The Southern District appears to be investigating a lot connected to Rudy Giuliani.
Rudy Giuliani, as the former U.S. attorney for the Southern District, should know better than anybody how much trouble it is when the Southern District really digs into you. When the Southern District investigates you, it's like one of those full body MRIs. Like every aspect of your life will be examined. Finances, your political ties, every action that you take will be
He's going through a
at.
divorce, too, on top of all this, talking about tangled finances.
Right, but I mean, look, he could be in trouble on a lot of different levels. First of all, let's remember, he's out there openly soliciting Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden. We could have bribery, extortion, foreign election aid there. We know he's tied in closely with Parnas and Fruman, these guys who were just indicted. There's money flowing back and forth. We know the Southern District is looking at him for potential lobbying violations. If, in fact, he was representing Turkey, and he certainly did not register as a foreign lobbyist, that's a crime too.
When Michael Cohen got ensnared in all this, he went to jail. He's in jail. But I hear some people say, well, with Rudy, they would want him to turn over everything he knows, turn over all sorts of information. How do you think that plays out?
Boy, I'm trying to think of the possibility of cooperating Rudy Giuliani. I mean, I've cooperated some bad guys with some long history, but Rudy would be really tough just because it's all about credibility. And he's all over the map. I mean, he's on TV contradicting himself every 30 seconds. So I've put some tricky people on the stand as witnesses. If I'm back at the Southern District and I have a chance to flip Rudy Giuliani, I would think twice and a third time about that.
Of course, there's also the subject of flipping those other guys now who've been arrested and indicted. Will they flip on Rudy?
That's a huge question. And one thing that's really important to understand in the Southern District, cooperation is all or nothing. In some other prosecutors' offices, you can cooperate just on whatever the specific charge is. In the Southern District, if either of these guys from the charge last week or any of the four guys cooperates, they're going to be a complete open book to the Southern District. The Southern District will know everything they know about Rudy and anybody else.
That is interesting. You have to say everything you know. You can't just say, well, I'll tell you everything I know about John Berman. You say everything.
Anybody.
And I know a lot. Okay?
Happening now, Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo just arrived in Ankara, the capital of Turkey, to try to undo a calamity, perhaps make right a decision from the president that's had deadly consequences. They will meet with the Turkish president, hoping to persuade him to agree to an immediate truce and ceasefire in Syria, an invasion that Turkey only began after President Trump announced he would pull U.S. troops from the border to make it possible, abandoning America's Kurdish allies. In the Oval Office, the president tried to wash his hands of this conflict.
They have a problem with Turkey. They have a problem at a border. It's not our border. We're not a police force. As two countries fight over land, that has nothing to do with us.
I want to bring retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He is a CNN military analyst. General, not our border. That's how the president talked about the Kurds. He also called them no angels. And now we've seen pictures of Russians trotting upon U.S. bases there, and the U.S. having to blow up munitions dumps as they retreat. What's the takeaway to the president's words and the actions we're seeing on the ground?
It's both embarrassing and infuriating at the same time, John. It's pretty obvious that the president does not have a good feel for either geopolitical or strategic advantage provided by the military and the use of the military in different areas. The other thing I'd have to remind you of that a few years ago, when ISIS was running rampant in this area, there were no U.S. Forces in Syria, and General Votel was given a mission impossible to put a force together that would fight ISIS, which he did. It isn't the U.S.'s border, but those ISIS rebels or ISIS terrorists along that border certainly caused significant problems to the United States and most of our allies.
It was Liz Cheney who noted yesterday in this White House meeting, reportedly, the terrorists on 9/11 traveled 7,000 miles to blow up the World Trade Center in New York. Also at this White House meeting yesterday, the president was reportedly read comments from James Mattis about the risks of removing U.S. troops from Syria. And this was the president's response to that. Mattis was the world's most overrated general. You know why? He wasn't tough enough. I captured ISIS. Mattis said it would take 2 years. I captured them in 1 month. Mattis was the most overrated general. General Hertling, your reaction?
Yeah, it's a reaction to what was said. Remember, John, as all your listeners do, that Secretary Mattis, former General Mattis, resigned because of what he perceived to be the president's actions towards Syria. And he warned them, the entire administration and the president, that this would create a geostrategic crisis, not just in the short term, doing something for short-term gain, getting soldiers out of there, but in the long term. This is going to have second and third order effects, which concern me in the extreme. This is going to cause problems not only in the Middle East, but in Europe and in the United States. And I think that's what Secretary Mattis warned him about. And now he's bearing the repercussions of that and trying to place the blame at someone else's feet. And it's probably not going to work.
I want to put a picture up on the screen for you and our viewers to see here. This was inside the White House yesterday during that meeting with congressional leaders. You see the confrontation there between House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the president. Sitting next to the president is the chair of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, there. And you see, I think, the strain that this has put on the military as the president makes this case about withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria. I wonder if you have any guess of what General Milley was thinking there and just the overall morale inside the military as the president has chosen to take these actions and mount this strange defense that he has, saying it's not our border.
Yeah, Mark Milley is a good soldier. He's been in the military, in the Army for over 30 years. He's served in various positions, both in peacetime and a significant amount of time, I think over 6 years in combat situations. He understands the implications of this. He knows how dumb it is. He knows that he, as the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, his primary job is to offer military advice to the president and to the Secretary of Defense. I would guess that he more than likely has offered repeatedly in probably very energized tones the challenges associated with this and the kinds of effects that will come about by the president saying the words he says, writing the letters he's writing, and all of those other things. I saw the pain in Mark Milley's face, and truthfully, sometimes those of us who are retired say, what would we do in this kind of a situation? And frankly, John, I'm not sure what I would do in this kind of situation because the president is not taking military or political advice in terms of how to address these issues. He's just not doing it. And again, it goes back to the fact he's getting his input from somewhere else. We can only guess where it is, but it's not from our military or our intelligence agencies.
General Mark Hertling, thank you for being with us this morning. We have breaking news on many fronts. New Day continues right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is New Day, and we begin with breaking news for you. Here's a shot of the Capitol, and people in Washington are waking up to very sad news. The death of Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings last night, just a few hours ago. According to his office, Cummings passed away, this morning at 2:45 a.m. Eastern Time from complications from what they call long-standing health issues. Cummings did have a heart condition, and in 2017, he underwent an aortic valve replacement. According to the Washington Post, he recently had a medical procedure, and he was supposed to only be out of work for 1 week, but the 68-year-old congressman then missed 2 roll call votes last week, and he never returned to his job.
He was beloved on both sides of the aisle and respected for his diligence inside Congress and as a committee chair. He was chair of the House Oversight and Reform Committee. That committee and the chairman playing a key role in the impeachment inquiry. Cummings is an attorney, a former state lawmaker. He was first elected to a seat in 1996. He became oversight chair in January after Democrats won back the House.
As this news hits Capitol Hill, lawmakers already have a very busy day ahead. Just hours from now, Gordon Sondland, the EU ambassador at the center of this impeachment inquiry, or one of the central players, will appear before 3 House committees, including Oversight. His scheduled testimony, you'll remember last week, was blocked by the State Department. According to the Washington Post, Sondland is expected to say there was a quid pro quo with Ukraine, but not a corrupt one. He'll have to explain that, obviously, to investigators. Democrats are planning more interviews with State Department and national security officials next week.
All right, joining us now, CNN chief political correspondent Dana Bash and CNN chief White House correspondent Jim Acosta. Also with us, CNN chief legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin. I just want to play some sound from Chairman Cummings. This was in the hearing with Michael Cohen earlier this year, and I think it gets to the passion that he had for his work and his love for America. So listen to Chairman Cummings.
This is a part of your destiny. And hopefully this portion of your destiny will lead to a better Michael Cohen, a better Donald Trump, a better United States of America, and a better world. And I mean that from the depths of my heart. When we're dancing with the angels, the question will be asked, in 2019, what did we do to make sure we kept our democracy intact? Did we stand on the sidelines and say nothing?
Dana Bash, when we're dancing with the angels, the question will be, what did we do to keep our democracy intact? He's talking about the goings-on this year, but in a bigger sense, he's talking about the work that I think he did in Congress for decades.
Yes, and according to his own account, that is a phrase that he used in the one private meeting he had with Donald Trump at the beginning of the Trump presidency, when Elijah Cummings went and asked him to work together on lowering prescription drug prices. That was another one of his life's passion for, obviously, his constituents in Baltimore, but more broadly. Still, right now, where we are, it is Elijah Cummings, the oversight chairman, who is going to be missed beyond, obviously, his family and the very real human toll that this is going to take on colleagues on both sides of the aisle. He is one of the main players in trying to rein in and do the constitutional duty that Congress has to oversee the executive branch. And in no time in history, maybe during the Nixon years, maybe in going way back, but certainly in modern history, has it been this hard to get stonewalled at every single turn? And he was one of the lead players in that, and did so, as you just heard there, with passion, did so with a very dogged point of view. And there's no question that he is going to be missed for that strategic mind, but also for his humanity and his compassion.
Yes, because he wasn't afraid to wear his emotions on his sleeve. So he wasn't afraid to cry when he felt sad or frustrated. He wasn't afraid to sort of rail when he felt that people weren't listening or paying attention. And we just saw it. I mean, that clip sort of encapsulates that he still had hope, that we would keep our democracy intact, but he was frustrated by people's silence. And so obviously he'll be really missed. And 68 years old, it's just so young. And we'll have more in the rest of the program, but it does feel sudden for people waking up this morning, particularly, Jim, because we're in the middle of this another very busy week with impeachment that obviously he would have been a big part of. And so Gordon Sondland, people have been waiting for longer than a week for what is going to happen today with Ambassador Gordon Sondland, ambassador to the EU, because his first scheduled testimony was canceled for some reason. It was blocked by the State Department. Now he's been subpoenaed. So he has certainly he can provide answers, and investigators have a lot of questions for him.
Well, and I think what Elijah Cummings was saying in that clip about putting country first and being a patriot, I think is at the heart of some of the themes that are going to be discussed in this testimony today. What's been alleged so far is that there were members of the administration and people close to the president were kind of working outside of the lines. And Gordon Sondland appears to have been a part of an operation to hold up aid to Ukraine in exchange for some kind of payback from the Ukrainians in terms of investigating what the president believes to be corruption in the 2016 election and the Bidens. And what we're going to find out, I think, when Sondland is deposed and is questioned about all of this, is what exactly does he have to say? If he is going to say, as it's been reported, that there was some kind of quid pro quo that went on, the president of the United States has been on camera repeatedly saying there was no quid pro quo. Many of his defenders up on Capitol Hill have gone on the shows and said there was no quid pro quo. And so that has the potential to be some pretty damaging testimony if he ends up testifying truthfully about all of this. The other thing is, according to Fiona Hill, the top Russian, expert to the president, advisor to the president, was testifying just earlier this week, saying that Sondland and Mulvaney were a part of this, quote, drug deal, according to the former national security advisor, John Bolton. And so it does sound as though
using it metaphorically,
but it does sound as though there was some kind of rogue shadow operation going on to try to get the president his political dirt on Joe Biden and perhaps dredge up some kind of information that lends credence to this conspiracy theory that he and Giuliani have been peddling for some time now, that they were somehow the victims in the 2016 campaign.
So what we don't know is why he bowed to White House pressure last week not to testify or speak to Congress, and why he's decided to go speak to Congress this week. It was the Washington Post that reported he will say there was a quid pro quo, just not a corrupt quid pro quo. This is CNN's reporting here. And this is from friends talking to CNN's team. If you wanted to get this meeting, Sondland's going to testify, with Zelensky, then you could either abandon that or you could work through Rudy, the person said, again describing what Sondland may say on Thursday. They came to understand that what Rudy wanted was a public statement by Zelensky to look at Burisma and the server in 2016. And the larger picture, Jeffrey, when you look at this, is where Sondland could fill in more pieces to the puzzle, is the idea that through Rudy, Giuliani was this separate shadow operation to benefit the president that wasn't necessarily for the benefit directly of the United States of America. And person after person has been testifying over the last week to something to that effect.
And what makes him so important is that unlike some of the lower level people who have or are going to testify, Sondland actually had contact with the president. I mean, there is at least one phone call and perhaps more where he and Donald Trump talked about how Ukraine policy should unfold. That makes him especially important if the impeachment investigation is looking at Trump's direction of foreign policy. You know, what was the goal of American foreign policy in Ukraine? The core question of this whole impeachment investigation is, was Donald Trump pursuing the national interest or his political interest in getting dirt on Biden? Burisma, from that last full screen that we just put up on the screen, that's Hunter Biden's company. So, you know, what was our foreign policy in Ukraine designed to get dirt on Biden and thus, you know, Burisma, or was it about pursuing the national interest? That's why Sondland's so important, because he is a direct tie to Donald Trump on that subject.
Speaking of looking at the big picture, let's look at the big picture of what happened yesterday in this meeting between
Let's look at that picture.
Some, you know, congressional leaders, Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump, and as well as everyone there around that massive conference, Oval Conference table. And I mean, the body language, Dana, says a lot in this picture. This was the picture put out by President Trump to show that he felt that Nancy Pelosi was having the temper tantrum, that Nancy Pelosi said Donald Trump was having the temper tantrum. She then owned it and I guess turned it into an asset and put it on her Twitter feed. But the point is, there were a lot of words exchanged in this meeting. And this is, I believe, where Nancy Pelosi was asking him, why do all roads seem to lead back to Russia with you, Mr. President? And that's when there was a sort of angry end to the meeting, and the congressional leaders stormed out of it, or at least walked out and went to the microphones. What more do we know about what happened in there?
So many things to unpack there. First, can we just do one more beat on that photo? Because there you have it back up. Because until now, what her staff owned and what has kind of made her, kind of iconic among the Democratic base and even beyond that is that picture of her walking out of the White House and putting her sunglasses on. I mean, this makes that look like, not even at all symbolic. I mean, look at that photo of one woman standing up and, giving it to the President of the United States at a table with all men there. I mean, of course she's going to own that. Now, beyond the symbolism and the imagery that we're looking at, what was that all about? It was from all accounts, people I'm talking to, our colleagues are talking to, pretty intense. And that the president was pretty, to use his word that he likes to use, rude to her. Maybe it was a two-way street. It was very antagonistic. I'm told that when the members of Congress came back to the Capitol, particularly on the Senate floor, because there were senators there, it was all the talk, even among Republicans, how the president treated the House Speaker. But it's also important to keep in mind what this all means beyond the histrionics. And it is the reason the president was so upset is because the House of Representatives dealt him a huge, huge rebuke yesterday with a vote saying that he should not have done what he did with the troops in Syria.
Bipartisan.
And the majority, not only bipartisan,
2-1 Republicans.
exactly. The majority of his fellow Republicans. I mean, we've been looking at the Republicans on Capitol Hill saying, when are you going to stand up? They stood up. And that is one of the reasons why the president was so upset. And Nancy Pelosi is one of his favorite foils.
Yeah, look, he's lashing out at Nancy Pelosi there, but you can see in his head probably that it's the Republican defections, I think, that he's most nervous about. Exactly. Jim, what's your reporting on that?
I would say so. And, as much as President Trump considers himself to be a master tactician at all of this, he may have, played things badly here, not made a great chess move here. He is going to need those Republicans in the Senate to stay home if he is impeached in the House and they conduct a trial in the Senate. And Mitch McConnell was saying yesterday, in addition to this meeting that occurred over at the White House, Mitch McConnell was talking to Republicans behind closed doors and saying he intends to hold a trial in the Senate if the president is impeached in the House. And what has happened here, and Dana, I think, put her finger right on it, what has happened here is that this Turkey-Syria policy that the president, sort of rolled out there without any notification to a lot of the stakeholders in Washington has unnerved the very people he is going to need if things get very critical for him over in the Senate later on this year. And so this may have been one of his worst moves since he's come into office, because there are a lot of Republican senators. They won't say it publicly because they're worried about being tweeted about, but they will say privately that they've had it up to here with this president.
Look, and I will just note, whatever the politics, there are people dying right now in northern Syria. U.S. allies are dying while these things are being said and these letters are being written. Just keep that in mind as well. Jeffrey Toobin, Jim Acosta, Dana Bash, thank you. More breaking news, very important breaking news. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson just a short time ago announced a new deal for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union for Brexit. But the deal still needs to be approved by both the European Parliament and the British Parliament. CNN's Melissa Bell live in Brussels with all the breaking details. This is a giant step, Melissa.
Oh, it's huge. And you can see by the way that the pound rose on the back of this very surprising 11th hour breakthrough and the hopes with it that something had been achieved. The negotiators here in Brussels, across the road at the Commission, John, had been working day and night. European negotiators one hand, British negotiators other. It was very difficult to see how they were going to cobble together some deal, given how different all their positions were. In the end, they did it. What now happens is that European leaders are to arrive along this red carpet later today. Angela Merkel has just arrived here in the building, we understand. The other 26 European leaders will also arrive. The deal will be put to them. The expectation is that they will accept it, since, after all, the EU negotiators have been working on their behalf, protecting European red lines and so on. The real question is what Boris Johnson does now. We had this tweet from him earlier, and this was how we learned the deal had been done, saying we've got a great deal done. It now needs to get done by Westminster on Saturday. We need to get behind it so we can get to the other priorities of this government. And that really is the likely next sticking point. It is likely it'll get past the European leaders. This was a deal negotiated on their behalf. How he gets the numbers behind him, and this is, again, where Theresa May had failed before him. For now, it's very hard to see. But a glimmer of hope this afternoon, certainly.
Wow. I mean, this is just changing by the day, by the hour. Please keep us posted when you have more information, Melissa. Thank you. All right. So President Trump facing criticism on his decision to pull U.S. troops out of northern Syria, including from one of his fiercest allies in Congress. We're going to take a closer look at the complicated dynamic between the president.
CNN.
Most Republicans are standing by President Trump in the impeachment battle, but when it comes to the Syria policy, there has been a break in the ranks, with at least one top ally speaking out against what the president is doing. You might say that Lindsey Graham's relationship with Mr. Trump is, quote, complicated. CNN's chief political correspondent Dana Bash joins us once again from Washington. It is complicated. What have you learned about what's going on in this dynamic, Dana?
Well, Allison, we've seen the last year and a half of Lindsey Graham's political life has been defined by his metamorphosis from a McCain Republican who bucked his party leadership to a Trump Republican who toes the president's line. Well, this week, we do see their relationship is very complicated.
Lindsey Graham is frantic.
He's making the biggest mistake of his presidency.
Donald Trump is annoyed.
I think Lindsey should focus right now on judiciary.
Lindsey Graham is warning about terror attacks.
He will have American blood on his hands if he abandons Kurds, because ISIS will come back.
Donald Trump doesn't want to hear it.
The Democrats, the do-nothing Democrats, as I call them.
Listening to that, it's hard to believe Graham is one of Trump's most loyal allies. It's like a time warp back to their campaign rivalry.
I don't think he has the temperament of judgment to be commander-in-chief.
Then, 2016 Graham warned voters about exactly what 2019 Graham is apoplectic about now, that Trump's promise to withdraw troops from the Middle East will make America less safe.
For God's sakes, pick somebody who is worthy of the sacrifice of those who are fighting this war and who actually knows how to win, and I don't believe that's Mr. Trump.
For Graham and Trump, it's complicated, very complicated. On abandoning the Kurds, U.S. allies against ISIS, Graham says he's holding Trump to the Obama standard.
By assuming the Kurds are better off today than they were yesterday, that is just unbelievable. I can imagine if Obama said that, what Republicans would be saying now. So I'm going to say it with Trump. That is just unfair, dangerous.
Good afternoon.
But what if Obama called a foreign leader and asked for dirt on his political rival, like Trump did with Ukraine's president on Biden? It's hard to imagine Graham would say, no big deal, like he is now.
This phone call is a nothing burger.
In fact, Graham is still staunchly defending Trump.
Thank you very much. Been a good hearing.
Even using his powerful role as Senate Judiciary Chairman to backstop the president against the House Democrats' impeachment inquiry.
I can do two things at once.
But that's not how the president seems to see it.
He ought to find out about what happened with Comey.
Senator, what is the president's mood today?
Trump seems almost disoriented that Graham is not singularly focused on settling scores against Democrats.
What happened with President Obama? What happened with Brennan? That's what Lindsey ought to focus on. That's what the people of South Carolina want him to focus on.
It's not about me and him. It's about the country.
Yet it is about the two of them. Being close to Trump helps Graham, who is up for re-election in South Carolina, where the president has so much support a top Graham aide calls it Trumpistan. Trump treasures Graham as a golf buddy and a navigator in the ways of Washington. But we now know Graham's influence, his attempts to curb the president's isolationist worldview, has limits.
Lindsey Graham would like to stay in the Middle East for the next 1,000 years with thousands of soldiers and fighting other people's wars. I want to get out of the Middle East.
Now, Graham has always been quite candid in saying that staying close to the president keeps him relevant. And being relevant, being effective, though, we now know, which from his point of view is keeping the president from making calls that he dislikes and says are dangerous, impulsive calls, in the words of Lindsey Graham. We know that those are two very different things. Allison.
Right. I'll take it, Dana. Yes,
And
if
John.
Lindsey Graham wants that relevance, it's not keeping Donald Trump from doing things he doesn't want him to do. That's for
It's
sure
not.
right now. Thank you, Dana. All right, breaking news. Longtime member of Congress Elijah Cummings passed away overnight. We are going to speak to a friend and a member of Chairman Cummings' committee. That's next.
Blood, sweat, and tears. Consultation.
CNN Tonight with Don Lemon. Tonight at 10 Eastern.
Breaking news this morning. Congressman Elijah Cummings of Maryland, chair of the House Oversight Committee, passed away last night. In a statement, his office said he died due to complications from long-standing health challenges. Joining me now is Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She serves on the House Oversight and Reform Committee. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us. I know he was your chairman, but he was also your friend. So just tell us what his loss means to you this morning.
My heart is broken for his family, for his community, for our country. Elijah Cummings had unmatched integrity, wisdom. You couldn't spend 5 minutes with Elijah Cummings without feeling impacted deeply by his guidance, by his values. He was a mentor and someone who, in every situation, you would do the right thing, would put his community and the cause above everything else, including himself. And to have watched him struggle with the health problems he had and still lead the Oversight Committee and push to make sure that the Constitution and our nation's principles were upheld was a privilege that I don't know that I'll ever experience again. But I know that we'll walk in his shadow, in his shoes that will never be filled. And each of us will, on the committee, and as we press forward with this impeachment inquiry, we'll have to try to draw strength from the wisdom that we benefited from for so many years.
He wore his passion on his sleeve. There's no question about that.
Really
his passion, his love, his work ethic. I was with him on the streets of Baltimore, where he's on the streets, literally on the streets, trying to keep his constituents and the people of Baltimore safe during the demonstrations and
Which
the
he did.
protests after the death of Freddie Gray.
Single-handedly, almost.
And we've seen his passion as he runs the hearings. Will testimony today, is that going to go on as scheduled?
My expectation is that it will. That's certainly something that I know that the chairman would want.
And again, just one point before we move on to talk about that hearing. He had dear friends on both sides of the aisle. So people have seen him being a Democratic chair but that didn't mean that he wasn't beloved by many Republicans.
Absolutely. Fierce partisans on both sides had respect and admiration for Elijah Cummings. I watched it, whether it was Jim Jordan or Mark Meadows or Jason Chaffetz, Trey Gowdy. This was a man who earned respect, deservedly so, who just no one could get away with pulling a fast one on Elijah Cummings. He called out. He had a big BS detector, and he called it out whenever he saw it fit, but also made sure that he stayed focused and on task. And his task was standing up and doing the right thing for his people.
You're saying he called it out. I was smiling only because he didn't just call it out. Sometimes he yelled it out or screamed it out inside a hearing so everyone in the room and beyond could hear.
And focused.
Congresswoman, today you are part of one of the committees that will hear from Ambassador Gordon Sondland. He was scheduled to testify last week. He did not after pressure from the White House. Now he is coming to testify. Right. Part of this group of people who's coming despite efforts from the White House to stop that testimony. What do you want to hear from him? We know he spoke to the president during those text messages and during those explicit concerns among some of the diplomatic corps that foreign policy was being conducted for the president's personal benefit. What do you want to hear from him?
Well, I want to hear from Ambassador Sondland about the depth of his involvement in pushing the president of Ukraine and the Ukrainian government to do President Trump's bidding in order to influence the 2020 election. What has been stitched together by the evidence that has been uncovered throughout our impeachment inquiry is that this appears to have been a well-orchestrated effort over a long period of time to get to threaten a foreign country and its leadership in order to be able to influence the outcome, influence the 2020 election, and go after one of the president's chief political rivals. And this is a man who appears to have been the linchpin in the center of it all. And certainly with those text messages, the only time that you see someone saying, call me after they get a text message that they're uncomfortable about is because they don't want a track record or a trail of evidence to follow them.
He's been pressured by friends. CNN has been reporting he's been pressured by friends to come and tell the truth no matter what. The Washington Post is reporting that he will testify something to the effect of, there may have been a quid pro quo, but it wasn't a corrupt quid pro quo. Do you feel, what kind of a distinction do you see there?
Well, I serve on the Appropriations Committee and am part of the committee that builds our foreign aid budget. And I was in Ukraine in March on a Senate CODEL, had an opportunity to speak with a number of different members of the Ukrainian governmental leadership. They need the funding that appears to have been withheld to hold over the head of the new Ukrainian president in order to get them to investigate one of the president's rivals for personal and political benefit. And that's illegal and unacceptable. And this inquiry is going to continue to stitch together the evidence that more and more, to me, is demonstrating that the president's intention was to use to pressure a foreign country and its leadership to help him in his own personal and political ambitions.
Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, we look forward to speaking to you again after these hearings. And once again, we are sorry for your loss, for America's loss.
It's a devastating loss for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Congresswoman.
What a touching interview there with her.
And I think it's important to note, I think we could talk to dozens, if not hundreds, of members of Congress who would feel exactly the same way.
Certainly Mark Meadows. I mean, he and Congressman Cummings had that very emotional exchange of affection that we all